everybody. It is Tuesday, April 30th. I'm mo.news, and this is the Mo News podcast. This is, of course, the place where we bring you just the facts and we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill is actually traveling back from Florida today, so solo edition today, though she will be back tomorrow. But with that, this last day of April, let's get started. The USDA has announced plans to start precautionary testing of beef cattle in the country for bird flu. It comes as bird flu remnants were found in some milk in part of the nation's dairy supply from dairy cows, though I will tell you at the outset here, they believe that everything is safe, but we'll give you some details as to what they know right now. We will check back in on America's college campuses again, a number of them where the protests continue. Deadlines have been made. Some have been kept, some have been ignored. Suspensions have begun at a couple universities, and one university has struck a deal with protesters camped out on their campus. The FCC announced a major fine for a number of the biggest wireless companies for sharing our location data, but the wireless companies are fighting back. There's some new numbers out today about wealth under the age of 40, actually a positive story about Gen Z and millennial wealth for once. The U.S. Secretary of State is in the Middle East trying to lock in a hostage deal, a temporary ceasefire, as the Israel-Gaza war approaches 7 months. We have some new data out when it comes to C-sections in this country. The rate continues to go up in the U.S. We're going to dive into that. We'll talk a bit of tech news as the U.S. has moved forward here with the TikTok legislation and what it means to the future of the internet as the great decoupling happens between the U.S. internet and the Chinese internet. And some movie news with a new Lion King prequel that's coming out. Some of the voices you will be hearing behind those characters. And of course, I'll end as always with On This Day in History. But let's begin here with the bird flu latest and the safety of the U.S. dairy and meat industry. It's something a number of you have been messaging us about. The U.S. Department of Agriculture announcing yesterday that it's going to begin testing samples of ground beef at grocery stores across the country, focused in on states where they've already seen an outbreak of bird flu in dairy cows. So the USDA here now focusing on ground beef with testing that'll determine whether any viral particles of bird flu are present. We should note that some dairy cows are processed into ground beef when they grow old. Now it comes as we learned that the USDA last week found bird flu in a lung tissue sample from an asymptomatic dairy cow that was sent to slaughter from an infected herd. Now, the animal did not enter the food supply. One of the issues with the bird flu here is that many of the cattle, the cows, are asymptomatic or have very few symptoms. So they haven't gotten a real sense here of how large the outbreak is among cows. The belief is that somehow the bird flu got from birds, maybe into the feed of cows, and that has now spread to a number of herds across the country in at least 9 states, though there's a lot of under-testing right now, so they think it's much more widespread. The USDA announcing yesterday that they will begin requiring all lactating dairy cows to test negative for bird flu before being shipped across state lines. It comes as they're trying to contain the outbreak here. They did conduct tests, PCR tests of milk showing that pasteurization does kill the bird flu virus. Now, you might have seen the headline last week that tests showed that 1 in 5 U.S. commercial milk samples do contain remnants of the virus. So these are remnants of the virus, not active virus. Again, pasteurization of the milk killing the bird flu virus. So now they're going to begin analyzing retail beef samples with PCR tests. In another study they're conducting, they're going to use what's called a virus surrogate in ground beef and cook it at different temperatures to determine how the virus is impacted. So look out for that data. The USDA says so far that once you cook meat to a safe internal temperature, that'll kill all key bacteria and viruses. Now, while they have seen bird flu in dairy cows, they have not seen any in beef cattle so far. But again, they're doing this as a precautionary step here. Now, again, most dairy cattle that have tested positive for the virus were asymptomatic and again, with very few symptoms. And as far as humans are concerned, so far still only 1 case in an American this year. It was actually somebody who works in the dairy industry very closely with dairy cows. So the assumption there is they got it directly from the cow. The only symptom that person had of the avian flu was pink eye, conjunctivitis in one eye. Now to the situation on college campuses that we've been telling you about as we monitor things across the country on nearly 50 campuses now. Colleges across the U.S. yesterday imploring the pro-Palestinian anti-Israel protesters to clear out tent encampments. With rising levels of urgency, it comes as a number of these campuses need those areas to prepare for graduation and commencement ceremonies in the coming weeks. There were more arrests yesterday made at UT Austin down there in Texas, and there was an ultimatum at the same time in New York at Columbia University, where the university is calling on students to sign a form and leave the encampment as soon as possible. But first in Texas, we told you last week, hundreds of police swarmed campus as protesters first tried to build an encampment on the campus in Austin last week. They conducted a bunch of arrests. Well, the protesters returned yesterday. They were quickly greeted again by law enforcement officers, many of them in riot gear. A handful of protesters arrested again yesterday. It comes as the governor in Texas, Greg Abbott, posted video of troopers on social media regarding the 50,000 student campus saying, quote, "No encampments will be allowed. Instead, arrests are being made." UT Austin clamping down, one of the more aggressive universities in dealing with these encampments. Meanwhile, at Columbia, where arrests were conducted more than a week ago, but then protesters returned and the campus has been negotiating with the protesters. They issued a deadline yesterday, 2 p.m., to clear out the lawn area. Well, the students were having none of it. More than 300 of them, some students, some outsiders on campus, meeting the ultimatum with chants, clapping, drumming, saying they will not move. There's more than 100 tents now set up in the center part of Columbia's campus. Again, they set a deadline of 2 p.m. And as of early evening on Monday, the university made no physical moves, but did announce they were beginning to suspend the students who are still parked on the lawn. Columbia University in a long statement earlier on Monday saying they had a 2 p.m. deadline to leave. And if protesters left by the deadline, they could finish the semester in good standing. They wanted a signed deal there. But it appears that for the most part, the protesters did not listen. They're trying to call a bluff here from the university. The university needs this area in about 2 weeks to do graduation. They're saying it's become a distraction here. They've heard what these students have had to say, and they're willing to make some concessions, but they need the encampment to go. The university is saying they're going to allow more transparency when it comes to their investments. These students, remember, among their demands is calling for divestment in all companies that are working with Israel or supportive of Israel. That includes a slew of companies, dozens of companies, from weapons manufacturers to tech companies, etc. The university declaring yesterday they're not going to let the students dictate what companies they invest in. But again, they're willing to have a conversation about it. That's not enough, though, for the students at Columbia. They were shouting on Monday afternoon, Israel can go to hell, and we will not go. Notably, there was a pro-Israel protest that came onto campus near the Columbia protest. They were chanting, "Where are the anti-Hamas chants?" trying to call out the fact that the encampment is overwhelmingly, as far as the leadership is concerned, supportive of the Hamas terror group. So the Columbia students say they're demanding more. They want concrete proposals from the university, and they say that they will escalate things. It's unclear what they mean by escalate, but that's where things stand again as of early Monday evening right now. And it comes again as campuses across the country are preparing for graduation. We told you last week about USC, the University of Southern California, is being forced to cancel its main graduation ceremony due to the encampments in the public areas. And it appears the inability to move them despite arrests, the return of the protesters, and an unwillingness so far from the university to move ahead and clear out the encampment. Though notably down in Washington at George Washington University, that's a case where the university is calling on D.C. police to clear out an encampment, and the D.C. police have decided they're not clearing it out. So in each of these cases, a lot of unique circumstances here between the universities, local police. Though notably, we'll tell you about what happened in Northwestern yesterday, where the university struck a deal at Northwestern University with the protesters just there outside Chicago. That's where protesters had gathered for the last several days on an area called Deering Meadow. They struck a deal on Monday with the university. Under this deal, the university says they will allow the encampment to continue through the end of the June quarter, but they limited the number of tents the protesters can have. And Northwestern said they will not allow outsiders onto campus, that only students, faculty, and staff are allowed in the protest area. That's been a huge issue in some of these campuses, where in some cases they found that a majority of the protesters on the college campus are not even associated with the university. As far as divestment is concerned, Northwestern also not committing to divest from Israel, but they said they will set up an advisory committee, what they call an advisory committee of students, faculty, and staff who can make suggestions about what they call investment responsibility. The university also, Northwestern, committing to support visiting Palestinian faculty and what they call students at risk, funding 2 faculty members for 2 years, as well as funding the full cost of attendance for 5 Palestinian undergrads in the coming years. They're also going to build a temporary. They're also going to provide a new temporary space for Muslim students and are renovating a house on campus for that purpose. A lot more developments on all these campuses. We'll continue to bring you all that over on our Instagram account, the Mo News Instagram account, at Mosh, at MOSHEH. All right, now to today's speed read. First from Reuters, the FCC yesterday fining the largest U.S. wireless carriers nearly $200 million for illegally sharing access to, what else? Our location data. The FCC finalized fines that they first proposed 4 years ago, $12 million for Sprint, which, by the way, is now owned by T-Mobile, $57 million for AT&T, and a $47 million fine for Verizon. According to the FCC, in a statement yesterday, they said the carriers sold real-time location information to data aggregators, allowing highly sensitive data to wind up in the hands of bail bond companies, bounty hunters, and other shady actors. Again, this is the statement from the FCC. Now, the wireless carriers say they plan to challenge these fines, that it was a third-party culprit. They're not doing it anymore. And they need the location data for a variety of important things like roadside assistance, logistics, medical emergency alert services, human trafficking alerts, and fraud prevention. Verizon putting out a statement saying that it's worked really hard to protect customers and that when, quote, one bad actor gained unauthorized access to information relating to a very small number of customers, we quickly and proactively cut off the fraudster, shut down the program, and worked to ensure this wouldn't happen again. AT&T agreeing with Verizon, saying that this order lacks legal and factual merit. It unfairly holds us responsible for another company's violation. Effectively, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile saying here, not their fault, and they're going to fight this. And so unclear if this fine will be paid as the wireless carriers are fighting back. All right, a bit of economic news here from Axios and some data that I think some of you will find very interesting. Americans under the age of 40 saw their wealth rise by a staggering 80% since just before the pandemic. That is a far higher rate than any other age group. This is new data from the Federal Reserve Bank. And so the analysis here is that the under 40s had some cash in the last few years, and between the stonks and the stimulus checks, were willing to take more risks than older Americans. In other words, here during the pandemic, 40-year-olds flush with checks put their money into stock market, into Bitcoin, into other riskier investments, and saw some major gains. Now, a reminder here that millennials are those born between 1982 and 1996. They saw their wealth, specifically millennials here, double over this period. And when you look at Federal Reserve data going back to the late 80s, they've never seen young households see growth like this. Of course, the stock market was huge post-COVID there, and it appears that a lot of young people were able to leverage that. Now, when they talk about wealth, they're also talking about household assets. So remember, home values increased significantly over the last couple of years, in addition to bank accounts and stocks. Average housing wealth rose $22,000 over the last couple of years as home ownership rose and liquid assets climbed, mostly stocks and mutual funds, increased by an average of $31,000 over the last couple of years. So again, it looks like the younger folks were able to take some risks and were able to benefit from that overall. Though when you look at larger numbers when it comes to wealth, older Americans still far, far, far wealthier than millennials. And when you look at boomers and Gen Xers at this age versus millennial and Gen Z, the older generations at this age had higher income vis-a-vis inflation at that moment, as well as had a higher home ownership rate. So some good news to tell you about young people, but still, historically speaking, still facing some challenges their parents and grandparents did not face. All right, let's go international here with this next story from the New York Times. The Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, urging Hamas yesterday to swiftly accept Israel's latest and what he calls extraordinarily generous proposal for a truce in Gaza to secure the release of hostages, an increased amount of humanitarian aid, calm in Gaza, and hundreds of prisoners released from Israeli prisons. Blinken made the comments at the World Economic Forum in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia yesterday. Here's a bit of what he said.
a major effort that's been made over the last couple of months to get to that ceasefire, to get the hostages out. And right now, as you said, Hamas has before it a proposal that is extraordinarily generous on the part of Israel. And in this moment, the only thing standing between the people of Gaza and a ceasefire is Hamas. They have to decide, and they have to decide quickly. So we're looking to that, and I'm hopeful that they will make the right decision, and we can have a fundamental change in the dynamic.
All right, so that was Blinken there as he's in the region trying to lock in a deal that they haven't been able to make now for months. Remember, the last hostage deal, last temporary ceasefire was back in November. We're about to start May tomorrow. Hamas negotiators were in Cairo yesterday. They're meeting with the mediators, the Egyptians and the Qataris, who are mediating between the Israelis and Hamas. Right now, the U.S., Israel have agreed on a deal. It's a 6-week ceasefire, additional humanitarian aid, as I mentioned, and it comes as it looks like the deal right now would include 33 hostages right now in the first stage. That includes women, children, and the elderly, as well as those with serious medical conditions. A previous deal was asking for 40 hostages to be returned, but Hamas said they actually don't have that many alive, so the number became 33 here. There would be multiple stages here if the first stage was to work out, including a second phase of a truce beyond 6 weeks, a period of what they call sustained calm. So this could turn into a long-term ceasefire here, though so far Hamas has been reluctant to agree on anything. They feel like momentum is behind them. They see Israel being scrutinized, and they don't feel a need to make a compromise here as additional humanitarian aid has been coming into Gaza. And so they don't feel the need to stop the war right now because the optics, they feel, are in their favor. So pressure here from the U.S., the Egyptians, the Qataris on Hamas to take the deal, again, what Blinken calls extraordinarily generous. It comes as actually there's still 133 hostages who will remain in Gaza. 34 of them are thought to be dead. Of the 100 living, 33 would be part of this deal. I should note that 5 of the hostages are American. There's actually 17 other countries, hostages also represented, still being held in Gaza. It comes as the Israelis are threatening to move forward with an invasion of southern Gaza if this deal isn't agreed to by Hamas. That's the city of Rafah. You've heard about it. There's more than 1 million Palestinians displaced there. The Americans have said no support for an Israeli invasion of Rafah to get the remaining members of Hamas if Israel cannot figure out a way to get those displaced civilians to a safer place. So that's something we're watching here as well. There was also a conversation we told you about between President Biden and the Prime Minister of Israel on Sunday. Among the issues that came up, according to Axios, the International Criminal Court, the ICC, you may have heard of it. It's different from the ICJ. So there's the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice. The ICJ handles countries. The ICC, the International Criminal Court, handles individuals. And that's at issue here. Concern within Israel that they might issue arrest warrants from the ICC for the Prime Minister, Netanyahu, as well as other senior Israeli officials, that they're preparing arrest warrants. They think they might be preparing them for Hamas as well. The ICC is a UN court, so it does not have a police force. It doesn't have any military force whatsoever. It depends on member countries. Right now, about 120 countries in the world are members of the ICC, but it does not include Israel, the US, China, Russia, a whole number of other major countries. Those countries are not part of the ICC because they fear politically motivated prosecutions pushed by certain countries within the UN. And so that's the feeling here from the Americans and the Israelis here, that the ICC is being selective in its approach. It's never issued warrants for Kim Jong-un, the Chinese, and the treatment of Uyghurs, Bashar Assad in Syria, the Iranian government, the genocide in Darfur, but potentially here, Israel. So they feel that things are selective. The Israelis and Americans do. But again, the ICC can just issue warrants. It does not have a police force, but it would make life very difficult. For Netanyahu, for example, he would be limited in terms of where he could travel by about 120 countries that are ICC members. The expectation would be, for example, if Netanyahu was to face an arrest warrant, that if he was to travel to Germany, France, and England, that those countries, as ICC member countries, would be expected to conduct an arrest there. So it could very much limit mobility here. But there's no indication whether this is actually going to happen. This is just a fear right now, rumors right now. And it appears there's a number of NGOs and member countries from the Arab world that are pushing the ICC to do this. Again, unclear whether this happens, but something we're certainly monitoring. And you can watch our coverage over on the Instagram account. All right, from Axios, the rate of C-section births in the U.S. has gone up again, about 33%, 1 in 3 births in the U.S. As of the most recent data are C-sections. Now, notably, the World Health Organization says that the ideal rate is between 10 and 15%. The U.S. has had a much higher C-section rate than the rest of the world, than much of the world for a number of years. And this 33% rate is the 4th straight annual increase. Now, there was a decline in the teens between 2009 and 2019, but now we've seen an increase for 4 straight years. According to Axios, a number of factors could be playing in here, but one major issue, patients overall, women giving birth overall, are sicker right now. They're seeing increased rates of gestational diabetes as well as hypertensive disorders in pregnancies. So that is leading, they believe, to a greater need for C-sections. Part of the background here is suspected, again, not confirmed, is environmental exposures could be the culprit here. Now, when you look at the data, repeat C-sections account for many of these procedures. And if you're familiar with this, if you tend to have had a C-section for your first birth, oftentimes you will have a C-section for your second birth, unless they conduct something called a VBAC. As Axios dives into this, they also believe there are a number of cases that some doctors are more inclined, just generally speaking, to perform a C-section because that option is less likely to lead to a malpractice lawsuit. It also allows for more planning, picking a date and then conducting a C-section. And of course, there's a financial role here, according to Emily Oster. The healthcare system reimbursements for C-sections are generally higher than that for vaginal births. So they believe that could be playing a factor here as well. All right, back to business news here. From Bloomberg, the U.S. push to ban TikTok marks a new phase in its approach to data security that could eventually impact everything in the world from electric vehicles to healthcare. It's reshaping right now the bans here and the relationship over the internet, the relationship between China and the U.S., the world's biggest economies. We told you last week about President Biden signing legislation that could ban TikTok here in the U.S. within a year unless the Chinese company ByteDance sells the app. Now, this is a move aimed at preventing China from accessing troves of data of about 170 million Americans who use TikTok, and frankly is a copycat of the laws China is passing in regards to U.S. companies. China has long been much more restrictive in the apps, companies, websites it allows into the country. And now the U.S. Appears to be playing a bit of that game. Now, there are companies willing to play by China's rules. Among them, it appears Elon Musk's Tesla. He was just in China in the past couple days. Bloomberg reports that it's going to partner with a Chinese company on mapping and navigation functions. Remember, Chinese companies are required to pass along information as necessary to the Chinese government. It appears Tesla, to break into the very large Chinese market where electric vehicles are huge, is going to play by China's rules here. The U.S. for years has tried to maintain an open internet, but now with increasing concerns about China as an adversary, what they're doing with U.S. data, especially as more and more data is being taken from people, the U.S. appears to be moving away here from an open internet and unrestricted data flows. This is called a tech decoupling, effectively here the building of two internets globally. We've had one internet, but China's been building its own thing behind the giant firewall. And the U.S. now appears to be doing its own thing. This was much more aggressive during the Trump administration. Trump actually looked to get other countries to block Huawei. That's a huge Chinese company that provides 5G networks. And so the Trump White House really was pushing other countries to put limits there on China. Biden has not gone that far, but this data clash is picking up. It has the concern of the FBI officials, intelligence officials, who do believe that it's necessary now to block China from accessing certain data here in the U.S. And so this TikTok bill might be the first of many as we watch, again, this tech decoupling between the U.S. and China. All right, we're going to end here with some entertainment news from the New York Times. You might be hearing some familiar voices when you head to the theater this Christmas season. Mufasa the Lion King. This is the prequel to The Lion King that is set to come out this December. Well, Blue Ivy Carter and Beyonce will be among the voices voicing various characters. Again, Mufasa the Lion King is a prequel to The Lion King. It's going to tell the story of Mufasa and Scar and how they came to be. And this is going to be made in the same way that hyper-realistic remake of Lion King that came out back in 2019. So not old school animation. This ain't your grandparents' animation anymore, but hyper-realistic, incredibly visual film. Beyonce will be the voice of Nala. Blue Ivy will be voicing Kiara. That's the daughter of Nala and Simba. Other voices you'll be hearing: Donald Glover will be back, Billy Eichner, Seth Rogen, and a whole number of others. Again, this is in line with a hyper-realistic remake of Lion King from 2019. This will be the prequel, how Lion King came to be. That last film in 2019, by the way, made more than $1.5 billion at the box office. So we'll see how this one does. The music, by the way, for this film, coming to us from Lin-Manuel Miranda. You know him from Hamilton. So he'll be penning many of the film's songs here. And this will be in theaters December 20th, just before Christmas. All right, we end here with On This Day in History. We're going to begin in 1939. We want to wish live television today a happy 85th birthday. On this day in 1939, NBC hosted the first ever live TV broadcast. It was at the New York World's Fair, and it featured President FDR speaking live on TV for the first time. All right, fast forward to 1975. On this day, the Vietnam War officially ended as the South Vietnamese capital of Saigon fell to communist forces. Nixon had already resigned by this time. It was more than 6 months later. Gerald Ford, who had just taken over as president, was unable to convince Congress to make good on earlier promises to rescue Saigon from a communist takeover. And so on this day, 49 years ago, Saigon fell. All right, fast forward to the 1990s now. On this day in 1993, a scary incident on the tennis court. Top-ranked women's tennis player Monica Seles was stabbed in the back during a match in Hamburg, Germany, by a man who described himself as a fan. A very scary incident, if you remember that, 31 years ago today. Staying in the 1990s here for one more item. On this day in 1997, Ellen DeGeneres' character from the ABC series Ellen announced on primetime TV that she was gay. This was a remarkable moment to have a primetime TV character come out as gay. One of those iconic moments from 90s TV. All right, staying with pop culture here. On this day in 2004, 20 years ago, Mean Girls premiered in theaters for the first time. We're still trying to make fetch happen 20 years later. And ending here with music, 28 years ago today, Dave Matthews Band released their second studio album, Crash. And one more iconic album from the 90s. On this day in 1991, Boyz II Men debut with their Cooley High Harmony album, featuring the hit song, Motown Philly. All right, I want to thank all of you for listening to the Mo News Daily Podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this podcast with your friends. Leave us reviews. The reviews matter, so appreciate all of you. Right now, we have a premium podcast that's out exclusively for premium listeners, featuring the host of the Unbiased Science Podcast. I think you'll enjoy that conversation. We dive into how to read studies and get at what's behind health and medicine out there in a straightforward, just the facts way. You can check that out over at the Premium Podcast. You can join Mo Premium. You can join Mo News Premium for just $7 a month over at mo.news/premium to get access to that podcast, as well as our premium Instagram account. We're promoting it all week right now on the main account. So check out our Mo News regular Instagram account this week for the free trial, free preview like they used to do on HBO of Mo News Premium. We have a special deal we're announcing tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. For all of you who are interested in joining Mo News Premium, for those of you who can't wait, join today, mo.news/premium. All right, everyone, we'll see you back here tomorrow. Safe travels, Joel.